Okay, so good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. I'm Devesh Lati from the Next Genius Foundation, and I welcome all of you to this session to learn more about history, to learn more about how history is structured as a major, the future of history, and why studying history is important, right? And to share all these details with us, we have Professor Alison Fletcher from Juniata College. She is the Newton and Hazel A Professor of History, and she joined Juniata College as a faculty in 2007 as an assistant professor of history, and she has worked as an assistant professor of history at Kent State University. She earned a bachelor's degree in history from Bryn Mawr College, and she went on to earn a master's degree in history in 1995 and a doctor's in history, both from Johns Hopkins University. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Fletcher, and I'm excited to learn more about history. And over to you now. Please go ahead now.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you all. I've been at Juniata College for 14 years, and I believe it's a special place, a place where dreams can come true. So before I talk about the history curriculum, I'd like to tell you why I think studying history is important. History allows us to explore new worlds, learn about different cultures, and importantly, it can help us to understand ourselves. History is not about memorizing names and dates, I promise you. At heart, history is about stories, listening to and understanding a diverse range of stories that can help us understand our world and the choices we wish to make to guide our own futures. So studying history gives us knowledge and helps build skills that can be applied to all walks of life. So to all professions, as well as to our personal lives, critical thinking skills, research skills, and the ability to write well. But it actually does more than that. Learning about people who lived in the past, their challenges, helps us to build empathy for others. And I think develops our ability to think about how we wish to live our own lives. So I've been asked to talk to you about the structure of the history academic curriculum across the 4 years at Juniata College. So I'm going to attempt to share a screen in a minute. Okay, technology is actually not what I'm best at. So I want to talk about what it takes to be a history POE at Juniata. We call majors POEs. So if I use the term POE, it just means major. Now, the history POE allows you to take classes that cover a wide range of time periods and geographic locations. We have 2 faculty whose area of expertise is US history, if that is your area of interest. But you can also take classes on many other parts of the world, for example, on China and Japan, on Africa, on Europe. So to complete a history POE is very straightforward here, and the program is flexible and open to you shaping your course of study. So I'm going to put up a slide, I hope.
Yes, you will be able to do that, yes.
Yes, I am doing that now. So there we go. All right. So in total, you need to take 12 history classes of your choice at different levels, 5 at the 100 to 200 level. And so you see a list of classes in front of you. This is some of the ones you can choose from, and you will pick 5 from this level according to the interest that you have. And some of these classes are incredibly popular, as you might imagine. The history of food is very popular with students. You do quite a bit of cooking. So you take 5 from that list. And then you take 5 from this list. These are the upper 300 level or 400 level classes. So they are much harder. There's more reading. There's a lot more intensive research in these classes. And as you can see, some of these classes are on the history of science and medicine. I teach disease medicine and empire, and it's very, very popular with both science students and pre-med students. As well as these classes, these 10 classes that you can pick from, there are 2 required classes. You take a class called Sophomore Colloquium in your 2nd year, and this helps you develop your ability to research and think like a historian. in this class also develops a range of skills useful for your professional life after college. In your senior year, you take a class called Historian's Craft to further develop your knowledge of the major schools of historical thought. At the same time in your senior year, you take a 1 or 2 semester senior research thesis. So what does that mean? It means you pick the topic that you want to research on for 1 or 2 semesters, and you can do it for either. Most of our students choose to do a 2 semester. So you choose the topic that you wish to research on, and we have students that choose a very wide range of topics, okay, all over the globe and time periods. And you choose the faculty member you wish to work with. Okay, so that's how that works. So if you wish to learn any more about these specific classes, please email me, and you can get my email address both on the website, the history website, and you can see it here. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the history department and what it's like to be a history student here, and the other things we encourage you to do. All right, it's not just about the classroom. We very much believe here that students can learn as much outside the classroom as they do inside. So the faculty in the history department are all very, very accessible, and we meet with our students out of the classroom regularly in a range of ways, many of them great fun. So this building you see in front of you is Founders Hall. It's the oldest building in the college. And so I think it's sort of logical that the history department should be in the oldest building. We're on the 3rd floor, and I don't know if you can see my pointer, but just there is the window behind me that you can see there. All right. So one of the things I want to stress is all our classes attract students who are studying in other disciplines. So if you're learning history here, you're going to be learning in classes with students who are studying the sciences, psychology, business, the arts. And these students bring different perspectives, and this really adds to class discussions. So our classes are not lectures. They are discussion based. Now, many of our students do internships in museums or archives locally, history archives, or in their home area, or when they study abroad. So I just want to talk for a few minutes about studying abroad here, because the history department encourages all the history students to study abroad for 1 or 2 semesters. And if you're an international student, you indeed can do this. And I think that's important to stress. Now, we have a wide range of sites that you can study at. Now, English language sites are obviously going to be in the United Kingdom. They're going to be in Ireland, they're in Australia, and they're in New Zealand. And I have a student study in all of these places. I myself have visited all these sites, and I know the faculty in a great deal about what it's like to study there. And so you would choose to go abroad for 1 or 2 semesters. Do you have to do that? No, you don't, but we think it's really a growth experience. Okay, so we encourage it. If you speak French or Spanish, you can go to a range of other sites, which are language sites. To give you an example of a student who did study abroad a few years ago, she was from India. She went to Glasgow University, which is in Scotland, and she had an absolutely amazing year, and she traveled across Europe as well. But one of the things that was really striking and that she really valued was the university chose her to give a TED talk for them. And so she was broadcasted giving this TED talk, and her topic was decolonize your mind. So now, I understand that students from India may want to take the opportunity while they're here to explore the US. So we also have a range of short-term study abroad programs, if that might be something you'd want to do. And these are usually about 3 weeks in the winter or summer breaks. And you do get academic credit for these classes, just to make that clear. And so I've taken students to Australia and to Rwanda. And at the moment, I'm developing 2 short-term study abroad classes, one to Kenya and one to Madagascar. And as well as history students, I am expecting these classes will attract students who are interested in environmental science. If you know anything about Madagascar, you would know that would be true, but also students interested in international health in both these places. So I think that covers the structure of the academic curriculum for the history department, unless you have any questions about that before we move on.
No, I think this is perfect. Yes, absolutely.
All right, so I'm moving now to the next question you asked me to think about, which was concentrations within the field.
Yes.
So you can concentrate in many different ways. I mean, if you are particularly interested in studying Asia, for example, then you can take many of your classes in that area, huh? So that is possible, and you can certainly write your senior thesis on anything that really interests you. Moving on from that, the History and Museum Studies POE is becoming very, very popular with students. There are only about 12 undergraduate institutions that grant degrees in museum studies in the whole of the United States, and we are one of them. So we have a really great program if you're interested in developing a career that has anything to do with museums. And we also have a wonderful museum on site for students to work in. Now, as I've said, students in other disciplines are interested in taking history classes, and we have developed history classes with them in mind. So, for example, students who are environmental science students can take a number of environmental history classes which apply directly to their major. Or if you're interested in, example, digital media, a number of our history classes are part of the Digital Humanities Certificate. So for example, in a couple of my classes, students make documentaries. They do the research and then they put together a documentary on topics of their choice, again, obviously within the class material. Okay, so if you're interested in digital media, that is something that the history department also develops. Now, it's becoming increasingly common for students in the sciences, especially pre-health and pre-medicine, to take history classes at Juniata College. And with them in mind, we have developed, very recently, I should say, a medical humanities secondary emphasis or minor for this reason. So what does this mean? So students take a number of classes in the history of medicine and science, a few classes also in ethics and communication. Now, students enjoy these classes, and they are very helpful when they apply to both graduate school and medical school, because they demonstrate students are well-rounded and have developed skills and knowledge that they would not have done if they had not moved out of their main disciplinary area of the sciences. So to give you an example of a student who's done that with me, so last year I worked with a pre-med student who wished to research and write a thesis on the history in the US of patient autonomy. That is the ability of patients to make informed medical decisions in a relationship with their doctor. And over the year, the student learned a great deal in their research about how limited patient autonomy has been in the last 40 years in this country. And it helped the student think very deeply about what kind of doctor they wish to be. They wrote a thesis that adds to the scholarship of the history of medicine. It was innovative, using original research that they found themselves, and they got into the medical school of their choice, and with a substantial financial scholarship. All right, so that's just one example of how the history department can help students who are interested in pursuing very different careers than history. So that, I think, has answered that question, unless you want to follow up.
No, I think it's pretty clear, and it's really interesting that the specific majors that you talked about. I mean, I really didn't imagine that there would be such minors which are getting more and more popular with the students these days.
Right, they absolutely are at this college, and we as faculty have tried to to respond to that, I've stopped screen sharing because I don't have any more slides. But yes, so we've tried as the history faculty to respond to student need and to what we're being told by graduate schools, and particularly, I would argue, by medical schools, the admissions boards. So then you wanted me to answer a question about what kind of student would do well in this major as a historian.
I think this is quite interesting. You know, students to know what kind of student would do well in this major, or what are some of the things, some of the typical traits that you see your students possess in this field. Yeah.
All right. So I'll answer that question as best I can, because I think students, as I've kind of intimated, come to study history for quite a wide range of reasons, all right? So I always tell students that the characteristics that I think make a good historian are also the ones that will help you succeed in life. So the first one I always stress is curiosity. Because if you are curious, you will ask questions and then you will try and seek out the answers for them. Okay, so I think curiosity is really important. And the second one I think is really important is skepticism, because I think it's really important to think critically and carefully about the answers that you find. So those two things I think are important. So if you look behind me, you'll see a lot of books. So it's helpful, very helpful, if you love to read. We do a great deal of reading in history of both scholarly literature and documents from the past. Now, to be a historian, you don't have to be a great writer. We do quite a lot of writing, but it really helps if you want to improve your writing. And so taking history classes will really help you develop your writing, which I would argue is useful in so many ways, in so many professions. So research, you also learn how to do research, because history is an interpretive discipline. Okay, so we really emphasize research. Finally, I think if you want to be a historian, it's important to be interested in people and the very varied ways that different cultures across time have organized their societies. Okay, so to be a seeking, curious kind of person, I think makes a good historian. But as I say, I think those qualities serve people well in many, many different ways in their personal and professional lives. So I think I've answered that question as fully as I can.
As a follow-up, I have one question, and it's not related to history, but it's something related to reading. And what is a book that you would suggest to a high school student who's from India? So international student, what is a history book that you would recommend them to read in their high schools?
Oh, in their high schools? Well, it would really depend upon what they were interested in. And I should tell you, I don't use textbooks. I don't use textbooks at all. And why is that? It's because I think when students read textbooks, they think that all history is known and understood and they just have to memorize it, huh?
Okay.
So what do I use? I use novels and I use memoirs, and I use a great deal of them in my classes. So I think that my answer is for history that to read novels from areas you're interested in. And I can, I use lots of novels. I can tell you one right now that I use when I teach the history of African women. I think it's a marvelous text. It's called Nervous Conditions, and it's by an author from Zimbabwe, Tsitsi Dangangaremba. And it's about a young Shona girl who lives in a rural area who desperately wants an education. And she will do anything to get this education. And her father doesn't think she should have it. He thinks that she should stay at home and learn how to do things that as a woman she will need to do. And that's not what she wants to do. So it's her story, her journey. And that's one of the books that I would read in one of my classes. So, I mean, I could tell you many, many more, but we've only got half an hour. So let's leave it at that for now.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, so I think we're ready to move to the next question. And that is, what are some of the typical career options upon graduation? That includes jobs as well as postgraduate programs.
Right. So I can answer that question with some real clarity, I think. So some of our students, a few of our students, not a great many of our students, go on to make the study of history their life. In other words, they go on to a doctorate. And we do have students in graduate programs in this country taking PhDs. And in fact, one of the students that graduated 2 years ago from the Juniata History Department is actually from India, and she is taking a PhD in European medieval history in a top US university. But I should tell you, it's very difficult to get into history PhD programs. And I should also tell you that the job market for historians in academia is it's quite challenging. Let me just leave it like that. Okay, so you really have to want to do it and make history your whole sort of direction professionally. So some of our students do that. We do prepare students who want to do that. So before I gave this talk, I had a look at where graduates from our department over the last 8 years, where they were, what they were doing now. And I can tell you they're thriving in a wide range of versatile careers. So they're in publishing and editing. Okay, they're working in museums. We have quite a lot of students working in museums, government agencies, public history sites. They are researchers, consultants, and as I've said, many of them try to go into editing. Some move into the business world, surprisingly. It surprised me how many of them do that. Taking the skills that they developed here, they seem to translate quite well into the business world. And to government agencies. I have a number of my students who are working in the US State Department in Washington. And I should tell you, a growing number of history graduates have become lawyers, they become librarians, and they even go into politics. Now, many of those students who go through the history department don't take a major. They take what you would call, I think, a minor, a secondary emphasis. And if I look at the list of successful careers that they go into, it's very wide. So students I've actually taught myself over the last year are working as or studying to become doctors, veterinarians, dentists, medical researchers, hospital administrators, and they are in international public health careers, and quite honestly, too many others to really mention. So I think this variety of careers that is possible for students who have taken history, either as a major or a minor, is testament to the skills that history builds. Skills that are desirable, I would argue, in a very wide range of professions and in graduate programs too for admissions boards.
Absolutely. And I think history is a way to build your logic. I feel that, history tells you why the things are the way they are, right? It tells you why India has certain relationship with other countries in the neighboring countries. It tells you a lot about why there are certain beliefs in the country and why people behave a certain way. So I am not at all surprised that historians or history majors would do extremely well in business because they understand how things work and how things have happened in the past. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yes, I agree with you.
Perfect. So this brings us to our last question, and which is, where do you think history as a major is heading, and what do you see the major evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Right. So in the history department, as I've said, what we've really been trying to do is to meet student needs, which is why we've sort of worked on developing digital media classes while we've developing our medical humanities programs. And I see us continuing to do that. I'm in the process of putting together 2 classes at the moment, which I will think will meet the needs of very different students. One of them is on Victorian science. science, and technology, which I know will interest many students, and I hope might bring some of our students who are interested in engineering into my class. And I'm also creating a class called Decolonize the Museum, okay, which I don't know how much you know about that, but that is becoming a worldwide sort of pressure on particularly European museums who collected most of their collections during the period of empires, about which I know a great deal because I teach British Empire. So I'm teaching. So I think as a history department, I think we will continue to respond to those kinds of needs from students. I also think that the trend for medical schools in this country, I don't know about outside this country, but certainly in this country, to want students who have taken humanities classes as well as science classes will continue increasingly, I think. I think it's going to grow because I think admissions committees believe that this helps develop the skills necessary for medical students to become the doctors of the future, able to empathize, understand, and truly be able to listen to their patients. In other words, to be able to develop a patient-centered approach to the practice of medicine. So I think all of those trends will continue, that history for me will go on being something that I just love to study and research and teach, but that is a discipline that's really responsive to student need and to, I'm going to say, the marketplace need as well. That last thing was hard for me to say, by the way.
Absolutely, ma'am. So I have one curiosity here. See, I have heard this phrase a lot of times that the victor writes the history, right? The victor writes the history. Now, how I see it is in any war or in any sort of a historical takeover or things like that, is it mostly true that the history is always seen from the perspective of someone who won the war? And eventually what happens is that that leads to a philosophy of that good always wins and evil always loses. I mean, I'm just trying to connect these two things. But does this make any sense to you? And does Victor writes the history and then just because he's the victor, they are considered as good and someone who lost are considered as evil? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. So yes, I agree that history books tend to be written in ways that meet a particular nation's needs, that feed into the myths of that nation's understanding of who they are. So if you read Russian history textbooks, they won the Second World War, which most Americans would disagree with, all right? So yes, you're right. But I would also argue that there's a huge push, and it's something I've been involved in all my teaching career, and that is to decolonize the syllabus, because I don't want to teach my students that kind of history. I want them to hear other voices, voices of women, voices of minorities, voices that we don't normally hear in history textbooks. And in that way, I think students can really begin to grapple and understand the complexities of the past in ways that help them, I hope, develop skills to deal with the complexities of the present.
That's absolutely fantastic. I mean, yes, I started to gain an understanding of what decolonizing the museums or decolonizing the literature, right? Decolonize the literature. I think that's the second initiative that would be on your table now.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I learned a lot, and I'm sure the students will watch this recording in the coming days, in the coming weeks, months, and years. They will gain tremendous insights into why should they study history and what studying history will be like when they study it at college. Thank you so much, Professor Fletcher, for joining us this morning and for sharing all your insights and sharing about your work with us. I'm truly inspired, and I really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
I enjoyed it as well. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, ma'am.